Hello, everybody. And so here we are live on Facebook. Welcome to our F show. And usually we ask the guests to say what F stands for them. For me, F is for freedom. So when I come to you, you can tell me what F means to you. But right now, I'd like to just let our audience know that I am with some young, savvy, clever professionals in the legal field. I was a little bit intimidated, I have to say, all you bright young sparks. Thank you so much for joining us. Our show today is in partnership with GPD, and I want to thank GPD for having been forward-thinking in understanding that it is important for young people to talk about legal matters during the time of COVID. So Shaista, we will come directly to you, and you can just give us a little bit of a background. We've got some slides on GPD. Tell us a little bit about the firm, and then we'll go into the work that you do. So Justine, GPD.
Thank you. GPD is a young, innovative, dynamic law firm. We are a group of young professionals that want to sort of transform and change the sort of traditional way in which law is seen and practiced. So we try to provide innovative legal solutions to our clients. We are a full service law firm as well. So we offer various services within the legal field, from commercial law, corporate law, litigation, employment law, family law. So we offer, a full service. We do like to try to offer an innovative way in which we look at these legal solutions that we provide our clients. The professionals and attorneys have all had training and experience from global top 10 law firms. So we offer, I think, quite an expertise in that regard. And we also offer sort of competitive pricing as well. But we also want to remain young and trendy. So we want to remain young and trendy as a firm, as entrepreneurs, and we think it's important to be involved in the digital space as well, in a digital media space. We think that presence is important to us, and we want to remain relevant. So from that perspective, we, as you indicated, want to be involved in issues that have a social impact, in issues that are related to social development, social justice, etc. And it was with that ethos in mind that we were very keen on collaborating with the F show and putting together this particular show. So for the purposes of this show, I think it also kind of started off with all of us being in lockdown and literally being told almost overnight that, our entire practice is going to have to lock down or shut down for an indefinite period. And I think as attorneys, we needed to manage our own practices, our clients, and it sort of got us thinking around the issues of access to justice during a time of COVID. We then, considered as a team our own challenges that we faced within our practice, within our matters. Literally, we were told, courts shut. You cannot continue working, but you need to continue working from home. And we really didn't fully understand what that meant in terms of, accessing the court, whether contact access was allowed. There was this issue of virtual access to courts. What exactly did that mean? And it was really, I think, an exciting yet daunting time for us to try to consider how to continue to practice during that time. And of course, then we also realized that, the sort of broader aspect or the broader theme of access to justice and the human rights aspects that are related as well. So we realized that these issues of just accessing justice in general became heightened during COVID. And again, as a firm, we thought, how do we deal with these issues? How do we deal with these challenges? And we had our own matters that, were then sort of stalled. For example, I was working on a trial at the time. We had to work on trial preparation, accessing the labor court, but doing this through email links or, virtual sort of contact and correspondence. And so we just thought, how I think together as a group, that it was important to look at these issues and to discuss them and to discuss our challenges and to really find a way forward in terms of how we make it more accessible to everybody.
I suppose that shift is going to be important.
Yeah.
What I'd like you to talk about now, Shaista, just in terms of your own work, your shift yourself, because you had your own law firm, and then you decided to join GPD, but you're working labor law and probably anything else that you think. I think we'd like to show Justine just the slide on Mandela, Black man in a white man's court. We'll have the slideshow, but you can talk over it.
Sure. So, yeah, I think, looking at what we're going through now made us think of this very extract, Black man in a white man's court. And in this instance, Madiba was questioning the justice at the time, his access to justice and the fairness to justice at the time. And in this extract, he basically makes an application to court and says, how do you expect for my matter to be adjudicated fairly if, as a Black man, I am before a white judge, a white court? And what does that mean for me? How will my matter be determined, in these instances? Before a white court, but also before legislation that was drafted by white people that was not relevant to him at the time. So this again looks at that access to justice and to what extent does that make sense to him in that instance. And when you look at looking at us now and looking at COVID, it's a very similar thing that at the moment we're just unable to properly access justice, access the court system, and that is one example. For example, if we're looking also at the issues of service delivery and the current protests that are happening, especially in Eldorado Park, again, there's a question of access to justice for Nathaniel, who was killed, and his family. Also, if you're looking at the issues of GBV and what that means during a lockdown, women in this instance as well during a lockdown have not had sufficient access to justice. And these issues, although some obviously go far back in time, looking at the apartheid times, but also what we're facing today, these I think the challenges that were there then are still applicable to us at present. As indicated, in my personal matters, we've had similar issues where we are working with clients who have to refer matters to court or have legal disputes. Again, the issue is how do we access those courts expeditiously, especially during this time. What has also happened is during the lockdown, there has been a suspension, during the actual hard lockdown of matters, which has eventually clogged up the court roll, which has then delayed justice in instances where matters would have been heard during that period of the lockdown, but we were just unable to hear those matters. So that again has delayed the system and has delayed the hearing of these matters. So going forward, we appear to be in a situation where there really is a very heavily court backlog, and matters being heard are probably going to be delayed. Matters being set down are going to be delayed. And so in the broader scheme, we question, to what extent or how expeditiously rather will these matters really be heard and considered. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so Justin, can we just show the UN Secretary General's remarks on human rights and COVID?
The best response is one that responds proportionately to immediate threats while protecting human rights and the rule of law. Looking ahead, we need to build back better. The Sustainable Development Goals, which are underpinned by human rights, provide the framework for more inclusive and sustainable economies and societies. Strengthening economic and social rights bolsters resilience for the long haul. The recovery must also respect the rights of future generations, enhancing climate action aiming at carbon neutrality by 2050 and protecting biodiversity. We are all in this together. The virus threatens everyone. Human rights uplift everyone. By respecting human rights in this time of crisis, we will build more effective and inclusive solutions for the emergency of today and the recovery for tomorrow. Thank you.
Talib, that was actually your introduction, because we are talking about human rights and we are so excited to have you with us, because not only are you a lawyer, but you're a filmmaker and a spoken word poet. So Talib, talk to us about, we have a clip which we'll show later on one of the films that you made, but I think right now, as we look at what is happening in the US, I won't preempt it. You can tell us from your point of view. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I just picked up on it. Thank you so much for this platform, and give thanks for those who are on the panel with me today. Yeah, so I have my own practice here, and I'm based in Maryland, which is the DC metro area, specifically where I'm based. And a lot of the issues that plague the United States now has always plagued the United States. It's just that there have been more television cameras and phones being recording certain instances of injustice that has happened in this Epcot particularly. But with my law practice, I practice education law, human rights, and some personal injury. So my work intertwines with my activism aspect of it as well, because I have a couple of organizations where we work on the ground. But specifically here, I know around the world, we've been seeing a lot of the extrajudicial killings vis-a-vis the police here in the United States. And that stems from a whole bunch of things. You know, it stems from the economic castration, the educational dilapidation, and just historic measures of gentrification that's going on within this particular country. And that helps to create the environment to where you can get people who are oppressed and exploited to be subjected to just being killed outright. You know, a lot of times when these killings happen here, you'll find that the excuse is he was reaching, you know, I fear for my life, things of the kind. And then after it happens, right, you'll find that there's nothing that was on the person. There was nothing that was in their vicinity at all. There was nothing to really create any imminent fear, you know, or a threat of danger. But that you have the police state that has been infiltrated by various groups that are allowed to kind of kill at will, as we've seen. And that's what creates the friction right now, you know. And then again, it's not just police brutality. You have to talk about how let's talk about the educational system here in Maryland alone. And this is Black kids far and above any other kids, right, in the state of Maryland are suspended and expelled at disproportionate rates as they make up population. So I'll give an example. There are a couple of counties here in the state of Maryland I'll point out. Prince George's County, Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Withrow in, let's throw in Charles County. Of those counties, Baltimore City and Prince George's County comprise of like the most Black people in the county. So in the state. So the statistic might be, say 80% of the citizens and the residents that live in Prince George's County are Black, but you may have upwards of 90% of the expulsion and suspension rates are Black kids. Same in Baltimore, same amount of statistics. You take a county like Charles County, that one has a lower rate of Black people that live in the county. Maybe let's throw 20%, 20 or 30%, but the suspension and expulsion rate is 30%, 40% of all suspensions and expulsions are Black. That's just education. Healthcare, there's an awesome book by Harriet Washington called Medical Apartheid. And if you have not read it, I suggest that you all read it. It talks about how the medical industry, doctors, things of the kind, have used, starting in colonization here, when they colonized America, United States, they used enslaved Africans as the test dummies for a lot of these instruments, you know, up into present, which is why, one of the reasons as to why Black folks don't like going to the hospitals, you know, because, you know, you go in with a headache, you leave with a missing toe, you know, and this isn't something that, this is known, you know. So like, that's healthcare. And then also the access to healthcare. You know, let's talk about food, the access to food. There are a lot of food, I call it food apartheid, not deserts, because deserts is a natural thing. But food apartheid is ubiquitous in the United States, in particular communities, Black communities. So now you don't have access to the proper food and nutrition. So when you don't have access to the proper food and nutrition, you can't concentrate in school, and your school is already dilapidated, so you don't have the resources in the schools. So now you can't get a good job. It's all connected. So when we look at police brutality that's going on here in the United States, oftentimes we view it, and particularly those that are outside of the country, view it in a silo, but it's not. Like, it's structural and it's institutionalized, and we see that time in and time again. And with the practice of law, my mission and goal is just to be able to provide the resources to be able to fight against these injustices and attack them systemically. And then outside of the practice of law, when I'm doing my organizing and my activism, is to provide food, the basics of food, clothing, and shelter for our people, so that way we can build a base to have structural and institutionalized power.
Talib, are you able to do a poem, a spoken word for us now?
Oh, sure. Okay. This one is called Child Mentality. This one I wrote because of everything that's been going on, you know, within society. Infantile minds, we are trapped as Black men, African oriented in time. With time, we curse the African thoughts that permeate through this African skin. Abhorring Blackness and denying overt truths, the caste system classes us in chains tied to brains that are portrayed to be of no use. Run and fetch it, we run to catch it. Drafting owners on auction blocks, we stand tall. Contracting silence on fields of violence, plantation fields, corporate links the chains to how we ball. Then we fall. To real knees on fake grasp, deafening ears to last gasp of air on Black souls, seen through blue eyes, fabricated the blue lies, ignoring the stories of unborn leaders never told. An educated Black man is a dangerous Black man, the troubles of which the system knows. But an willfully ignorant Black man succeeds his master's plan, and his seeds are poisoned before they're sown, and his liberty he will never know.
Thank you. We're going to come to you, Nadeem, but before we do, we have a little clip on legal access to justice. Justine?
Legal aid, so lawyers are affordable.
When court proceedings are in a language you can understand.
Judges who make decisions based on the evidence and the law.
When justice is done and also seen to be done. I have seen it and it has impacted my life.
Thank you, Justine. So Nadeem, we know that actually Dr. Nadeem, we like to say that, that besides the legal space, you're also involved in other areas of work and the religious studies, etc., that you've done. But I'm curious more around what you had done within the Constitutional Court and the South African context about justice. I think we like to pride ourselves as South Africans and say we have one of the best constitutions in the world, that, you know, I think labor law, etc., you know, because we came out of apartheid, we were very clear about what we wanted. But I guess it's the implementation thereof that we are having challenges with. And the current situation, Nadeem, with COVID-19, tell us what you've been experiencing and the kind of work that you have been involved in.
Okay, thank you for having me on the show, and I'm very happy to be here with all the other very fine panelists. I'll maybe start off. I think you asked what I did at the Constitutional Court. It was basically a year where I clerked under one of the justices, Justice Chris Jafta. And together at the time, I mean, at any given time, there's a number of clerks, I think about 24, 25 at the court. And it was a very fulfilling and fruitful experience. It was really wonderful to be working with the caliber of legal minds that I was, and also to see the operations and workings of the highest court in South Africa. And I think the court overall did take the issues of access to justice, petitions to court very seriously. And it is something that they were not blind to, or at least the process is not blind to. But yeah, I mean, there is definitely the concern at certain lower levels, especially in terms of how the bureaucracy of the legal, or I guess of the judiciary and of legal process, how that maybe undermines sometimes the access to justice for people who either cannot afford it or people who have some sort of difficulty in accessing those institutions. But let me move to the issue of COVID. And I think nothing like a crisis usually brings out the, or at least brings to the fore, the existing inequalities that exist in a society, and also results in exacerbating some of the problems that are already at hand. And so in the employment framework, or in the employment framework, this affects, I guess, security of employment, economic stability, and so on. And in the South African government has tried to regulate the effects of the lockdown, which was put in place to mitigate the negative impacts of COVID-19. And in trying to regulate that, they've put out certain types of regulations, and they've also initiated some type of financial relief for employees who would have been impacted by the closure of businesses during this time. And that's called the Temporary Employee Relief Scheme, and it's paid out through the Unemployment Insurance Fund. There have been issues with how that has been processed and where the payments have been made timeously. But that there is such a scheme is in fact quite positive. But again, the implementation sometimes leaves a lot to be desired. So I'll just speak quickly on three things that the government regulations have sought to establish in order to make the working space safe. The first thing was the financial relief, which I mentioned. The second thing was to ensure that working spaces are safe and secure and take into account health and safety concerns. And here they've put an obligation on employers to ensure that employees adopt and wear proper PPE, protective equipment in the workspace. Vulnerable employees be identified and either isolated in the workspace or allowed to work remotely. As far as possible, employees should be working remotely, ensuring social distancing in the workplace and sanitizing of surfaces and hands, and also conducting screening of employees and visitors to any workplace. And that also entailed a determination on whether a workplace was considered to be low, medium, or high risk. So we can imagine that certain health facilities would be determined or considered or determined after an investigation or some sort of assessment to be a high risk facility. And I think there has been some controversy in the South African context also around schools and schools opening and what type of level of risk is involved in that type of an operation. And the third thing that they've tried to regulate is protection of employees in the event that an employee tests positive for COVID-19. And here they've tried to implement a system where if a person needs to quarantine or be absent from work because they either have symptoms or tested positive, that though that absence is taken off sick leave as far as possible or annual leave. So try to avoid a situation where people are unpaid or go without any type of funding. And then also when someone does test positive, it's an obligation on the employer to assess what type of exposure other employees head to that person in order to determine what type of testing or medical assistance they require, and at the same time also do an assessment to find out whether the contraction took place, the contraction of the virus took place in the workplace. And if that was the case, there may be some other forms of claims for financial support for people who require medical assistance. And lastly, as part of that process, employers need to submit the information to the Department of Health and the Department of Labor to conduct contact tracing. Now, again, here in terms of the implementation, once the Department of Health receives the information, it's been a bit sketchy, the quality and level of contact tracing that has been taking place. So that has been, for the most part, what the government has done in terms to regulate these things. But we do know, and I'll maybe end with this point, we do know that certain industries, specifically the hospitality industry and certain other industries that have been impacted for a longer duration of time by closures, that the industry is very depleted. And the longevity of businesses in that industry and the security of tenure of employment is severely threatened currently as well. And at the moment, I mean, we don't have, or at least we're not seeing any, I think, tangible solutions tangible solutions in trying to attempt to redress some of those issues in very specific industries.
Thank you, Nadeem.
Yeah.
That's quite thorough. Thank you so much. Marie, we're going to come to you, but before we do, we found a clip on the African court. So I'd like us, kind of the constitutional court in South Africa, and maybe something on the African court, which is really just information before we have a chat. Justin, could we see that, please?
The African Court on Human and People's Rights is a tribunal established to ensure the protection of human rights across the continent. The court recently celebrated its 10th anniversary. It set up in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in November 2006. But in August 2007, its headquarters moved to Arusha, Tanzania. The first decade has been filled with challenges. 30 out of the 54 member states of the African Union recognize the court, but only 7 allow NGOs and individuals to bring cases before it. But perhaps the biggest challenge is that Africans don't seem to know the court exists. So has it failed? What has the court accomplished so far? And how will it move forward to guarantee human rights are protected across Africa?
Thank you. So it's just really a precursor, Marie, but I think it would be lovely to know your perspective generally in the work that you do and where you are located, and how are things, given now COVID-19, what is happening, and what have you yourself engaged with? So generally, I know that you've spoken about international trade law, the relationships between African countries. I hand it over to you. Are you on mute?
Thank you. And can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And it's really nice to meet all the panelists and to be here and share my perspective. And of course, I mean, what I can say is that, well, of course, a lot of people don't know about the African Court on Human and People's Rights, but it is there and it does work. It has dispensed a lot of cases. It has decided on a lot of cases. Actually, it has a very informative website that details the decisions that have been taken, the processes that are still pending, the judgments, everything is there. The information is there. It's just that I think that in terms of dissemination, a lot of work needs to be done in that respect. But for purposes of information, I'd like to tell everybody that there is an African Court on Human and People's Rights that sits in Arusha, and it was established under the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the establishment of an African Court on Human and People's Rights. The protocol was adopted in 1998 and entered into force in 2004. The court was really established to complement the role, the protective role of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is a commission that is mandated to monitor the implementation of the African Charter on human and people's rights. So basically the jurisdiction of the court is based on that, is based on the charter itself. And of course, the protocol lays out who can bring cases and what are the conditions. Now, of course, the state parties, AU organs are allowed to bring cases, but what is also very interesting is that NGOs and individuals can also bring cases, but there is a proviso to it. So in addition to ratifying the protocol itself, the state party has to make a declaration accepting the jurisdiction of the court, the competence of the court. In some instances, for instance, I know of 2 countries that have withdrawn that, let's say, that declaration. The case of Rwanda, for instance, and Tanzania that has recently done it in 2019. So let's just say, I mean, cases by NGOs have been brought, cases by individuals have also been brought, but yes, countries are very reluctant to open up that door.
Tell me a bit about the work that you do in terms of the trade law.
Right, so I worked as a trade policy analyst, and what basically we would do is support UNCTAD, which stands for the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, member states in the African member states in advising them on issues related to trade, especially under the African Continental Free Trade Area, the Tripartite Free Trade Area, SMEs development, trade in goods, trade in services, etc. So basically, it's to give policy advice on what is the best way to leverage trade for development. And of course, we would also support countries during trade negotiations. I don't know if most of you are aware, but the African Continental Free Trade Area came into force very recently. And I mean, it's the hype of the moment. Everybody is talking about it, and we are really looking forward to the potential that the African Continental Free Trade Area will bring in terms of increasing intra-African trade. So what we would do is also, provide policy advice to countries during the negotiations and provide clarifications on certain trade issues to allow countries to negotiate better, the terms of the agreement.
And during COVID now, has it impacted your work?
Well, of course, I mean, with the COVID-19, most of the meetings were done in person. So that could no longer be done. The African Union had to look for alternatives to make sure that the meetings can still be convened, because there is a specific agenda, a specific timeline that has to be respected. And of course, the union has looked into the ICT and finding, online platforms to make sure that negotiations can still go on, and all the other processes that support, the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was scheduled to start in July 2020. The start of trade was scheduled in 2020, but of course, because of the delays caused by COVID-19, this has been reviewed.
Okay, thank you. I asked Justine to get us a little clip of the Hague, what is it called, Shaista? Justine, let's have is it an international court, criminal court?
Yeah.
The International Criminal Court in The Hague was set up in 2002. More than 120 countries have now ratified the Rome Statute, the legal foundation for the court. Independent and permanent, it was established to bring to justice those accused of the most serious crimes of concern to the international community: genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. The ICC is a court of last resort and will only act if a case is not investigated or prosecuted by a national judicial system. It can also act if a country is clearly attempting to protect a person from criminal responsibility. A country may also be unable to pursue an individual because its justice system has collapsed. the ICC can only prosecute a person or persons whose crimes were committed in a country which has ratified the treaty, or if the accused is a national of a country which accepts the ICC's jurisdiction. An inquiry can be opened by the prosecutor at the request of a ratifying state. The prosecutor's office can also initiate investigations on its own, provided it has the prior authorization of 3 independent judges. The United Nations Security Council can also request the prosecutor launch an investigation, regardless of whether it involves a state party or not.
Thank you. Thank you. I just thought that we needed to have some kind of European perspective here, if it was possible. Now we'd like to come to you, Themba. I know that you are Zimbabwean based in South Africa, but you have worked in Zimbabwe as well. But before we do that, we're going to show just a little link on the human rights lawyer, Beatrice, who, as we know, is quite topical right now because of what is happening in Zimbabwe. May we see that, please, Justine?
People who go to do things under cover of darkness are afraid of light. So if you come at midnight, I'll be there with my headlights glaring.
When I was handed to the courts, that's when I had my first experience with Beatrice Mthethwa. I think she's like a godsend. You're not paying her for this, she's just doing it. That is just the most amazing thing about this whole thing.
Unlike a lot of other dictators, Robert Mugabe doesn't just go out and do what he wants. He first goes to parliament and passes a law and says it is now legal to punch somebody in the nose. And if you say, hey, you can't do that, he says that is the law.
The bottom line is that all countries are ruled by men and women. And the law becomes what they say it is.
If you do not include fundamental human rights as part of this definition, then you do not have a country based on the rule of law. Zimbabwe doesn't have that, and this is the problem.
The rule of law means you should be able to say, when all else fails, the law will protect me. Not who I know, not what my political affiliation is, not who I can bribe, etc.
Thank you. Welcome, Themba. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, the work that you are doing, and shed a spotlight on Beatrice, because I think at the moment she's really become quite an icon for many people.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Firdaus, to my fellow panelists and everybody who's tuned into the show. My name is Themba Mahlega, and I'm a Zimbabwean lawyer. I'm a consultant, and I work with the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law, as well as have my own legal consultancy. I do speak on this panel in my personal capacity, though. Thank you for sharing that clip about Beatrice Mthethwa. I want to talk about her and what's happening in Zimbabwe at the moment, and that really is a good segue because it shows her credentials, which speak for themselves, that she's one of the most highly regarded human rights lawyers in the country. Recently, she has been representing a client by the name of Hopewell Chingonono, who is been doing a lot of investigative journalism. That is what he's a journalist by profession. And at the time, he's been arrested. And at the time of his arrest, he was arrested on the 20th of July. He had just uncovered some COVID-19 corruption that had taken place in terms of funding that was meant to purchase PPE, had allegedly been misused, and he was arrested. But the grounds upon which he was arrested for were incitements to participate in public violence. He has since, through his legal team, been applying for bail, and to date is unsuccessful. In fact, just as recent as this morning, there was a hearing, a bail hearing for Hopewell, and the judgment has been reserved till next week. So we will find out if or not he indeed gets bail. Hopewell's arrest got a lot of support going from a lot of people. Hashtag Free Hopewell. There's also hashtag Zimbabwean Lives Matter. I know, Talib, you have Black Lives Matter in the States. In Zimbabwe, as a result of corruption, other allegations that people are quite tired of, there's the Zimbabwean Lives Matter hashtag, and so a lot of people are saying Hopewell has been he's being persecuted for his investigative journalism work, as opposed to the incitement of people to participate in public violence. His legal team, one of the members, Doug Coltart, has gone on record to say that they've also been trying to sanitize his cell and provide him with PPE because there was an outbreak in the prisons, and even visitors are not allowed in the prison at the moment due to COVID-19, and they haven't been able to provide this assistance for their client. And he believes that's a contradiction of the government's stance to be wanting to fight COVID-19 and restricting lawyers from giving their clients protective gear. So moving back to Beatrice, who was representing Hopewell, in the course and scope of her representing her client, she has since been removed from the matter, struck off by the magistrate, disqualified her because of certain statements that were attributed to her. She denies these statements, but I'll just read it because it's a short statement that was posted on Facebook. It says, where is the outrage from the international community that Hopewell Chiononwa is being held as a political prisoner? His life is in serious peril. Raise awareness about his unlawful imprisonment. Don't let him be forgotten. You or someone you love could be next, the next one to be abducted from your home and put in leg irons. And so her objectivity has been put in question as a result of that statement, which she doesn't even acknowledge as her own statement. And a lot of people have come out in support of her. Over 60 organizations, either as a joint statement or separately, have come out to say, in the first place, it's a violation of her rights as a legal practitioner to represent her client. And more importantly, Hopewell's got a constitutional right in terms of Zimbabwean law to legal representation, and is being curtailed by this. Over and above that, these statements say that even if she did say this, she has freedom of expression enshrined in the Constitution, in terms of the African Charter on Human Rights, and the United Nations as well, all protect one's freedom of expression. And so there's been quite a lot of support and outpouring. And I mean, some of the organizations, I won't go through because I said it's 60 plus, but Amnesty International, Human Rights Institute of South Africa, Human Rights Watch, International Commission of Jurists, the Kenya section, and the list goes on, have all come out in support to say this is a violation of this legal practitioner's rights. And so that's where the situation stands in Zimbabwe. As early as, or as recent as this afternoon, the heads of mission of Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America also issued a joint statement, which, amongst other things, was in support of the people of Zimbabwe, as well as their right to freedom of press, of opinion, of expression, and so this is ongoing, but this is a bit of context of Beatrice Mthethwa and what she's facing in terms of her work, her human rights work in Zimbabwe.
And then for yourself, Themba, you are now based in South Africa. Have you seen, is there a big difference between the two countries, both in terms of its legal systems and now with COVID?
Okay. Between the two countries, in terms of the legal systems, they both Roman Dutch law, based in Roman Dutch law. So there's a lot of similarities in terms of the rules and the judgments and the legal systems are quite similar. Right now, in terms of COVID-19, I do notice some differences. For example, you know, in South Africa, some of the panelists have spoken to some of the measures that have been taken in South Africa, and you know, there's digital filing of matters through case lines. There's the hearings. Some matters are being held virtually in South Africa, and that has not been the case in Zimbabwe, where there is still no mechanism by which you can file virtually or attend matters virtually. Lawyers are still practicing law. There have been some measures as a result of COVID to allow safer practices, so not so many people allowed to go into the court buildings, you know, in terms of public hearings, and even the staff of the courts will go on a rotational system, and there'll be less people going in and out of the courts. Certain matters and certain types of matters at the deeds registry, for example, on pause for the moment, unless it was already filed, then they're just seeing through the matters. And it's also, I think Shaista mentioned, you know, concerns about building of backlog as a result. And I know that is a concern some attorneys are having, that, you know, already an existing backlog will just grow larger. And there's also just been less work for legal practitioners in this time. And I guess it's reflective of just a slower economy. And so that's some of the sort of legal differences and some overlaps as well.
Thanks, Themba. Jamil, we're going to come to you, but before we do, I wanted to just show a clip of Deputy Chief Justice Motseneke, obviously previous Deputy Chief Justice. He's come up with his second book, and I'm giving this, I think, to all of you as young lawyers and legal minds. Can we show that clip, please, Justine?
Ask them now, how happy are they now? They'll probably growl and moan. And be unhappy as I am. Young people have to take and assume very firm and active roles, particularly around issues of accountability. No leader should get away with murder. None. And our freedoms and democracy and all the things we fought for in our generation will be alive and well, including diversity, including non-racialism, including social justice, including fairness and gender equality. Those things are high values of our struggle. And you guys have to go out there and defend them and protect them and call out those who betray those values. It doesn't have to happen within movements or particular movements. Young people have to think afresh, anew. They've got to recreate means and tools and conglomerations of their time in order to protect and achieve these things. You cannot escape. You have to determine your destiny. And the time is now. This is the time for us all to rise. Hands all rise. This is the time.
Thank you, Justine. So Jamil, there we are, giving it to you. Hands all rise. I want to thank GPD and you as a founding partner of GPD for really rising up, for seeing the opportunity and the need for young voices, your own voices. But I think we pass the baton on to you, and we say to you as legal minds, what is it that you are going to do? You have, I think, witnessed quite a bit, Jamil, in your short life. And COVID has, as Nadeem said, you know, just shone a spotlight on where the issues really are. So I hand over to you in as best as you would like to talk to us. I know that you sit within the commercial law space litigation is your area of work. Human rights might be there somewhere, but as an overall overarching kind of comment story that you want to share as GPD, we hand over to you. I think you're on mute. Have you frozen? So I think Jamil is on mute, and I think that he may have frozen. Ah, there we are. Hello, Jamil.
I think I froze for a second there.
Yes, you did.
I was saying thanks again for the platform. We appreciate it. You know, I mean, just drawing on that clip, and I think a previous clip which you played, which said, you know, that justice should not only be done but should be seen to be done. I think this is extremely important and significant. You know, this goes to the confidence which the public views our judiciary and the court systems and the like. I think within our own South African context, you know, during the lockdown period, we've also witnessed our own cases of police brutality. Most significantly, I think the case of Collins Khoza initially, and most recently the case of Nathaniel Julius, you know, the killing. And unfortunately, I think what's happened is, you know, the public hasn't seen justice being done in these instances, and I think that's extremely problematic. You know, that in itself for me is a restriction and a limitation on access to justice. I think also what COVID has done is that, as Nadim's pointed out, it's cast such a spotlight on the challenges and the inefficiencies of our judicial system and our court system at large. You know, I think prior to COVID, our court system was already in a dire state, and right now, I think we're practically on life support. You know, our courts have always been plagued with inefficiencies, delays, backlogs, and the like. And with COVID, these things have just been exacerbated. You know, the problem is the wheels of justice need to turn, but I think in those wheels turning slowly, that in itself is a massive hindrance to justice. That in itself just limits and restricts one's access to justice. You know, like Shaista pointed out, we've had matters, and I think attorneys across the country have had matters which have simply just been postponed with no end in sight during the lockdown provisions. We've obviously started to see the digitization of our courts finally, and sort of, I think that's a step in the right direction. And unfortunately, COVID has forced that process to take place. You know, the digitization of our courts has been something which has been long on the cards, and unfortunately, this process has now, you know, brought that to the fore. The problem again, though, is that this isn't applied uniformly. You know, we've got essentially the Johannesburg High Court and the Pretoria High Court, which are by far the busiest courts in the land. Those two courts have adopted the digital process and the case lines process, where virtual hearings are taking place and the like. By and large, other courts haven't followed suit, and that obviously is somewhat problematic. I think the other challenge which we're faced with is just in general, you know, I mean, the digitization of courts in a country like South Africa, where, you know, the cost of data is so high, internet connectivity and, you know, access to internet connection and the like is such a huge problem. That in itself, I think, creates different limitations and restrictions on access to justice. And I think what that requires is stakeholders, not just within the judiciary, but outside of the judiciary, you know, your telecoms providers, large corporates and the like, to really get involved and to start looking at sustainable solutions towards, you know, making things like digital courts a reality. The other thing which I've witnessed, you know, by under COVID time is with I tend to do a lot of commercial and contractual disputes and the like, and what we've seen is obviously, you know, I mean, the serious impact that COVID has had on commerce in general and contractual relationships across the board. Although I think, you know, I mean, because it's relatively fresh, you know, companies have sort of taken a stance to somewhat be lenient towards defaulting debtors and the like. But I think the true impact of COVID will only be felt within the months to come. And you know, to kind of sit back and just see what the stance will be in terms of how companies enforce their claims and contracts as a result of those breaches. And I mean, essentially, we're looking at companies trying to enforce specific performance and damages claims and losses which have been sustained over this period. And the problem is, you know, that's obviously fueled by their obligations and pressures which they are facing financially as well. You know, it's a vicious cycle, unfortunately. You know, you've got right at the top your financiers or your lenders and the like, imposing all sorts of obligations and contractual obligations on parties, and those things just flow down through right to the bottom. And that, I think, is going to create a massive hotbed for litigation going forward. Look, I think we, in terms of just access to the courts and the like, I think the digitization of the courts is a step in the right direction. I also think another way possibly to alleviate the burden on the courts is for us in a South African context in particular to try and actively look at using private arbitrations as a potential route to resolving disputes. You know, previously, I think, or currently, those platforms are only used really for specialist litigation and the like. The other challenge with those arbitrations is that they tend to be quite costly. So, you know, that is another stumbling block for, you know, using those arbitrations as an alternative. But yeah, look, certainly interesting times ahead. And I think there's lots of challenges which, you know, we as young professionals and young attorneys need to be actively engaging on in trying to resolve the inadequacies and the inefficiencies of our court system, which, you know, I mean, go back many years. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we haven't shown your clip, Talib. We're just going to show a minute of your film clip. Can we see that, please, Justine? And then we're going to show a minute or two of what was happening yesterday in Eldorado Park with this young man, Nathaniel.
It's Mickey Freeman. It's Mickey Freeman.
Killer cops are still walking the beat. The killer cops are still walking the beat. And not only are they walking the beat, they're walking the beat comfortably without money, getting back pay and everything. And what about Freddie Gray's life? But before Freddie Gray was executed, let's be real clear. This didn't start in Freddie Gray and it don't stop in Freddie Gray. Anthony Anderson was brutally executed. Corinne Gaines, Tyrone West.
So a little bit about what's going on here. Since last year, so this would be the second year that we did an actual rally that's dedicated to life. Freddie Gray, who was brutalized and subsequently died while in police custody here in Baltimore, specifically on Mount and Pressburg.
Thank you, Justine. And let's show the next clip that we have. I know I've just asked you to look for it right now, so I hope that we are able to show that clip. And then in closing, I'd ask you all just to consider one thing that you may have wanted to say that we didn't have time during your having spoken to me. Do we have the clip, Justine? Thanks.
Because a policeman shot a child of cerebral palsy dead last night. He's 16 years old, and after they shot him, still choke him and throw him into the van and still go take him to Baragwana Hospital. And this is the second time.
This morning, we got report of violent protests in El Dorado Park, which we responded to. We deployed our public order police. And we are told that the residents are accusing police of having shot the 16-year-old boy last night.
Thank you,
the arrests
Justine.
that were made today are for public violence.
Thank you. And I think, Talib, that was what I was saying, is that we could be looking at a lens in the US or a lens in South Africa, and I suppose everywhere else. Maria, I'm going to come to you first. We usually say F is for me, it's for freedom. What would F be for you? And what would be your last sentence?
I think F for me would stand for facts.
Facts?
Yes. And one thing I would like to say is that the COVID-19 has presented both challenges and opportunities. Challenges in the fact that it has highlighted the failures of the justice systems, the existing failures of the justice system, but it has also given an opportunity, especially to African countries, to think outside the box on how they can efficiently and timely dispense justice. And I think technology will play a big part out of it. But I think that while we are innovating and thinking of ways of making it, of making justice accessible to all, we must keep in mind that it has to be anchored on the respect of fair trial rights and due process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Talib, we saw your clip, if you want to say anything about it, and what would be your F word?
Thank you. So the clip that was shown was filmed in Baltimore by a brother of mine who I actually do my film work with. We partnered together, Amir Collier. The F I would use would be fortitude. You know, being able to continue on in the midst of pain and suffering. I think we've had a history of that. This entire pandemic, everything that's going on in the world is exemplary for that. And the fight continues on. So we need to, and this platform is beautiful because it allows us to really get a glimpse or inside look into everyone's realm and work in which they do, and realize that all of it is connected. All of this is connected. It's the same struggle, but just in different locations, you know, so fortitude would be my F word.
Thank you. Nadeem?
I think the F word I would go for is fellowship, and then I think, I mean, thinking about what the contributions by all the panelists, And picking up on what was said by Talib and Temba, and as well about Black Lives Matter, Beatrice Mtetwa, it made me think about one of the things to consider in activism and social struggles is that it can be based on one or both of two things. One is common interest, which is, people join a particular movement because they see in that movement that it addresses some of the issues that they also face. Or it can also be interpreted to mean that, if I don't fight for this today, if tomorrow it comes for me, there'll be no one there to protect me or fight for me. But I think what's more important than struggling with an idea of common interest is one of common opinion, where people are committed to ideas of social justice, irrespective of whether the contravention of human rights or one's humanity deeply affects them as a person or not. So we're committed to movements such as Black Lives Matter, Zimbabwean Lives Matter, gender justice, not because that we may have necessarily an individual interest in that, but because we are committed to a broader ideal of non-racialism, gender justice, non-racialism, those type of things. I think that's what I would like to say as my closing word. Thanks.
I think for me today, F is for focus, because I think that as much as we're talking about the challenges of the justice system, we do really have good structures in place, like the Constitutional Court, like the African Court on Human Rights, etc. And I think that the main issue is looking at how we take those structures and use them and to the best of our ability so that we can access justice. And I think that in order to do so, we need to focus on what those challenges are that we have and find a way in which we can find solutions and use our current structures to open up access to justice.
Thank you. Temba?
I'm going to cheat and make an F phrase as opposed to an F word, if you will allow me. And that F phrase would be freedom of expression in light of what we were discussing in the Zimbabwean context. And in my parting shots, I think right now many people, especially on our African continent, enjoy so many rights that basically just exist on paper, but in reality are not, translating into their everyday lives. And so we really need to look at this access to justice legal system we have currently and realize that for many people it's not fit for purpose. There's too many barriers, from language, literacy, financial barriers especially, and the list goes on. And even just procedurally, some of the systems are not fit for purpose. And so we need to rethink how we are actually dispensing or accessing justice, and even to look back on some of our, traditional ways of dispute resolution enshrined in the spirit of Ubuntu, and might find some options there. But I really do think we need to really overhaul the system, in my opinion.
Jamil?
For me, my F word is flexibility. I think in the current context, it's extremely important for our judicial system to be flexible enough to adapt and to change in order to meet the needs of its citizens and make justice more accessible. And in doing so, embracing things such as technology and the like, particularly under these circumstances.
Thank you. So I would like us to dedicate today's show to Nathaniel Julius. And as the family said, oh, that's quite a tough one, that a 16-year-old boy can be gunned down, and a 16-year-old child who's actually disabled and is not aware of what was being asked of him, and that his body can be taken to Baragwanath Hospital, almost dumped, and that the cover-up by whoever they are. So we do want to ensure justice for Nathaniel, and we want to remember him today as we want to remember all of the Black lives that matter, whether they are Zimbabwean, Nigerian, South African, Kenyan, wherever we are on this continent. Thank you all, everybody. Thanks for your wonderful conversation, for your generosity of spirit, for sharing so much. You as young people make us feel proud, and I feel optimistic, and I know that things will be better for all of us beyond COVID. Thank you and good night. Goodbye. I know, Talib, you are still in daylight. We're in nighttime. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.